Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crimson and in this video we are going to be starting something kind of new and something that I am extremely looking forward to making, both because I cannot wait to make this video and because you guys seem to have wanted me to cover these. So this is the first in our look through of the Warhammer 40k different faction codexes. So each faction or each playable faction in Warhammer 40k has a codex, which is a mixture between a rulebook, a lore book, and an art book. So yeah, this is the art book for the 10th edition Astra Militarum, which is my favorite army out of all of my 6 armies. This is the army that I play the most, and my army is 100% Deathcore of Krieg only. I absolutely love those guys. So, just a couple things to say before we get started. These codexes have a lot, and I mean a lot, of text. So, to stop these videos going on way too long, I am only going to be reading stuff regarding the Astra Militarum as a whole, and also the Deathcore of Krieg itself, just because they are the faction that I play. The codexes that I have are just based on the armies that I own, so I apologize if you are interested in seeing any non-Imperium codexes. You probably won't see those for a while unless I decide to, start a Xeno army. But yeah, with that out of the way, let us get started. And also, by the way, I bought this book at my local hobby shop about 3 hours ago because finding one of these was quite difficult. So we have this amazing cover of a bunch of corpsmen rushing into battle. We have our main guy here, and then 2 more, one in the background, one in the foreground, and then this guy kind of looking off into something. But yeah, let us get started. Now, there is going to be a lot of reading in this video, so I will do my best to read it as best as I can. However, I am extremely tired, so if I start to stutter or make mistakes or anything, I will just leave it and then come back once I have slept. But my excitement to cover this is pushing me forward. So the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard. So this is the main fighting force of the Imperium of Man. For those of you who aren't super familiar with Warhammer, you are probably at least familiar with Space Marines. And Space Marines are an extremely elite unit, and practically super soldiers. Not practically super soldiers, they are super soldiers and then some. Whereas the Astra Militarum are just regular men and women. No augments, nothing like that, just standard military training. And that's why I love them so much. So we have our table of contents here. Then we have this great spread. One of the things that is great about the Codex is, apart from actual hand-drawn art, you get a lot of diorama art. So as you can see here, there is a massive battle unfolding between what looks like, I think those are Tyranids against the Astra Militarum. So we have a couple of tanks here. I actually can't tell what kind of tanks these are. These 2 here are some of the more heavy-duty tanks. Really, really cool. I love dioramas with miniatures, especially with Warhammer stuff. I think they always look great. So, here is our first main paragraph. So, let us begin this paragraph. But before we do, we have this guy here who is your standard Imperial Guard soldier. So he is heavily based on a futuristic take on the American military, in my opinion, based on his helmet and his color scheme and all that. He looks like a Cadian, which is another type of soldiers. One of the cool things about the Imperial Guard is that while they all serve the Emperor and they all serve in the Astra Militarum, each planet kind of has its own type of soldier, so they're not all the same throughout. So each planet has a drastically different type of soldier, from their appearance, from their gear, weaponry, tactics, all that stuff. Which is why we saw that the Krieg on the cover are very reminiscent of World War I soldiers. You know, they have gas masks, they have las guns with bayonets, they have great coats. Whereas this guy, who is Acadian, looks a lot different, with green armor, an open face, and his armor being predominantly green. Now, just before we start, just because I am super tired and the lighting is really bad, I am going to have to turn on my little lamp here just so I can actually see. However, this is just for me to read, so you don't have to actually look, because there's no art being shown, and I'm only ever going to do this for the codexes, just so that I can actually see each word easier while I'm this tired. So, Hammer of the Emperor. Each of the manifold horrors of the galaxy is enough to drive a human insane. Xenos monstrosities, otherworldly sorceries, and unholy apparitions from the darkest nightmare plague mankind. Against everything that threatens humanity's survival stand the massed ranks of the Astra Militarum in a galaxy sometimes without light and often without hope. They fight and die that others shall not. From the million worlds of the Imperium, their immense armies march endlessly to war. Countless soldiers, heavy battle tanks, thunderous artillery, sky-darkening flights of gunships are commanded by iron-willed officers, whose chain of command is ruthless and enforced. The Astra Militarum are notorious for having some of the most ruthless commanders in all of science fiction. They will happily sacrifice 1 million men and women if it means they can kill one enemy, which is crazy and just goes to show how hopeless and, grimdark the Astra Militarum really is. Not for naught is the Astra Militarum known as the Hammer of the Emperor. Occasionally unwieldy, often indiscriminate, it is the Imperium's weapon of total and unrelenting force. To be a soldier in one of the Astra Militarum's unnumbered armies is to be amongst hundreds of thousands of all true mortal warriors. Yet it is also to be a part of humanity's greatest ever war machine, and to lend one's faith, strength, and hate to that engine of devastation as it crushes all before it through sheer brute force. So yeah, that is just a really great summary of the Astra Militarum for those of you who are not familiar. By the way, just so you guys know, in case I keep saying either Astra Militarum or Imperial Guard, they are the same thing. The Astra Militarum is like the official name for it, whereas the Imperial Guard is more of like the casual name, but they're the same thing. So if you see Astra Militarum and then in the next sentence they say Imperial Guard, they're talking about the same things. So here we have another great picture here of some Imperial Guard in a dugout, and they look like they are quite in a sorry state. We have what looks like a Commissar here, and I believe that looks like a Dread Knight in the back. Oh, sorry, an Imperial Knight or an Imperial Titan, which are massive, and of course you have your banners here. Really, really cool. And you also have some art of some cherubs here. Here is an incredible picture, and this was actually the cover art of the 9th edition of the Astra Militarum Codex. So we have a man on his horse holding up a sword, and it looks incredible. While yes, Warhammer is in the 41st millennium and is extreme science fiction, the Astra Militarum still uses swords, bayonets, horses, and all kinds of units and resources like that. There is nothing too beneath them. They will do whatever means necessary to secure a victory. Here is a little paragraph. I'm only going to be reading this one instead of the entire thing, but it says a glorious tapestry. Individual regiments and their worlds of origin, should they ever hear of their soldiers' deeds or all, glorify the noble deeds of warriors, famous last stands, and tales of selfless sacrifice and epic crusades across the stars, embroidered and aggrandized, held up as the ideal that the common soldier should aspire to, in the histories sometimes dating back millennia. So yeah, this has been going on for an extremely long time. Even for Warhammer standards, this has been going on for a very long time. The Astra Militarum existed, back when the Emperor, wasn't a corpse. So this goes in, first of all, let's look at the art. So we have a battle going on between some Chaos forces and some Astra Militarum. We also look like we have some Adeptus Sororitas in here. I believe that's Saint Celestine there. So here it just lays out a little bit of the fall of Cadia. Now, Cadia and I know everyone's going to cry in the comments, myself included, about the fall of Cadia. But so instead of reading this entire thing, I am just going to quickly summarize what happened to Cadia. So Cadia was a world that was one of the most renowned planets in the Imperium for producing Imperial Guard, and not just any Imperial Guard, some of, if not the finest soldiers in the Imperial Guard. And Cadia had an extremely important role. Cadia was essentially the planet right on top of, or right in front of, what is called the Eye of Terror, which I won't go into too much detail because it's a bit too nerdy lore, but essentially it is a massive portal between the warp and the materium. So any warp spawn, chaos marines, chaos demons, or anything like that were able to come out of the Eye of Terror, and this came to be with the birth of the first chaos god, Slanesh. So the Cadians had this duty that was both real and something that they took extreme pride in, that they were the bulwark that kept humanity safe against the Eye of Terror. However, during one of the Black Crusades, I believe it was the 13th Black Crusade, led by Abaddon, the son of the traitor Primarch Horus, they attacked Terra with everything they had. And not just them, everyone got involved. The Militarum were involved, the Sororitas and the Space Marines, on the Imperial side, and on the Heretic side, you had your Chaos Space Marines, your Standard Demons, and much, much more. So it was a total, I was going to say a word, but I decided not to say it. It was a complete and utter mess, to put it more politely. And essentially the Cadians knew that they were lost, but they were determined that they would stand until every single one of them had died. But what happened was Abaddon, the leader of the 13th Black Crusade, who realized that taking Cadia would not be an easy task, decided to board his ship, which was massive. I cannot remember the name of the ship, I do apologize, and crashed it right into Terra. Oh, sorry, not Terra, Cadia, oh my god. And thus breaking the planet's crust, and the planet essentially split in two. So Cadia and everyone on it died. So the first and most important line of defense against the Eye of Terror is now gone, meaning that warp spawn are now more freely able to enter the Materium world. It also means that the soldiers that Cadia produced, some of the finest in the Imperium, are now no longer existent. The only Cadians left are those who are off-world at the time. And it's mentioned in a couple of books, especially the book Frig. I would strongly recommend it. That essentially the Cadians view themselves as a dying race or a dying species. Very, very sad. But there is a very common saying in Warhammer that the planet broke before the god did, which is quite true, as the planet's crust cracked and the planet gave out before the god, or the Astra Militarum, surrendered. So yeah, that's just my little Cadia tangent over. So next we have some more information. We have a picture of some kind of tank here. I believe this looks like a Rogel-John tank, maybe? I actually can't tell from that angle. So let us continue. So here we have a gorgeous spread of another battle taking place. So there is a lot to take in this image. So let me just zoom out so you guys can kind of see it a little bit larger scale. So we have multiple soldiers. These are all Cadians, by the way. This type of armor is Cadian. So anyone with this armor is from Cadia. They also have a bunch of dead bodies here of their fallen comrades. It's not clear who they're fighting here, but it is rather interesting. We have two, I'm assuming these are, no, sorry, this is the officer in command back there. Let me zoom in. This is him here. And we have two banner bearers as well. And then we also have this guy who is mounted a heavy machine gun. that's either a heavy stubber or a heavy bolter and is lighting something up. The bolter in Warhammer is essentially a weapon that the Space Marines are only only able to use. The sororitas have like a kind of tweaked down version, but anyone who is not a Space Marine who fires a bolter will essentially die because of the recoil. However, the Astra Militarum decided to mount 2 of them on kind of gun emplacements and use them like that. So the ingenuity is top notch. So moving on, we have our regiments. So, and I am going to be reading a lot about this just because these are my guys right here. So this is the Death Corps of Krieg. So here is a lot about the Death Corps of Krieg. Now, I am not going to be reading all of this as I would be here all day. I'm just going to be reading the kind of most important parts about them as a faction. So on our left here, we see an amazing picture of some Death Corpsmen. So this is our standard infantry here, where they all wear gas masks. The gas mask is actually part of their uniform, so they never remove it unless they have to, basically to eat. You know, they even sleep with these things on. The common infantry, as with all members of the Astra Militarum, carry your standard issue las gun, which is an incredibly powerful weapon by today's standards, but quite possibly the weakest firearm in the Warhammer 40k universe. So let us get started with the reading, and I have to have my light on just so I can see this. Now, there is a lot of reading here, so I would maybe recommend, if you are listening to this while trying to relax or something, just to close your eyes, because you don't have to actually, look at anything here. So let's get started about the history of the Death Corps of Krieg. So let's begin. The Death Corps of Krieg. Grim, dour, and fanatically devoted to the Imperium, the soldiers of the Death Corps of Krieg specialize in doing battle in the most horrific of conditions. They are proponent of relentless attritional warfare and possess a willingness to sacrifice millions of lives in the pursuit of victory. The history of Krieg is one shrouded in mystery and rumor. Much of the truth of its past has been lost of time or purposely obscured by its leadership. Its surface is now a barren, rad-blasted, and poisoned expanse. That's part of the reason why the gas mask is part of their uniform, is because their homeworld of Krieg is a radioactive hellhole, to put it nicely. Where was I? Its surface is now a barren, red-blasted, and poisoned expanse of bombed-out cities, muddy shell craters, and coils of razor wire. Long ago, however, Krieg was a thriving hive world. So the next about 2 pages go over the history of Krieg. The planet of Krieg. However, instead of reading everything, I am just going to recite it from what I know, because I know this like the back of my hand. So Krieg was, like it said, once a thriving, beautiful hive world. However, its leadership turned their backs on the emperor and declared themselves independent, no longer under the imperial thumb and wanting to be free of its yoke. However, one man stood in its way of this, and that man is the greatest hero of the Krieg, and his name is Colonel Jurten. He fought against outstanding odds in the enemy's favor. However, he did not yield and always led from the front lines when possible. even with faced with certain defeat, the man did not yield and would do anything, and I do mean anything, to rid his planet of the heretics and bring his planet back into the Emperor's graces. So this began the Krieg Civil War, and this raged for a very, very long time. I'm talking centuries. And essentially what happened was Colonel Jurgen only had a very few number of men, and as the time went on, the heretics in charge of the government kept gaining forces, gaining ground, and all that stuff, where Colonel Jurgen was essentially stuck in a underground trench/bunker system. And he did everything in his power to try and defeat his enemy. However, it was seemingly and obviously hopeless. So Jurgen made the decision that if the Emperor could not have the planet, he would rather see his planet obliterated than having it fall to heretics. So he did one of the most forbidden things and disgraceful things you can do in the Warhammer universe, and that is using old world technology, aka nukes, to turn his beautiful homeworld into a radioactive hellhole. Of course, he died in the process, and everyone along with him on the planet died. But as far as he was concerned, he would rather have his planet be inhabited by no one, but it to be an Imperium planet, than for it to be a prosperous world that is led by heretics. So he did this, and it is a beyond despicable act. He turned this planet into a uninhabitable wasteland, but as far as he was concerned, he did the right thing. And because of this, the Krieg call dying atonement, because as far as they are concerned, they are atoning for their planets and their histories and people's sins, which makes them even more zealous in combat compared to your average Astra Militarum soldier. This just goes back in to some of the history, and after countless years, Krieg finally returned to the fold of the Imperium. Now, the Imperium always asks for a tithe from all of its planets. This tithe can be money, resources like food and energy or anything like that. But because Krieg had none of these things to offer, and all of its residents had lived in underground bunkers for centuries, the only thing that Krieg could offer the Imperium, as it says in the book, quote unquote, its sons, and to those it gave them gladly. So Krieg's one and only export to the Imperium and the world at large is soldiers, which is crazy. So these soldiers are brought up from childhood with the express purpose of going to war. They do not do anything else from the minute they are born, or cloned, depending on which sources you believe. They are drilled and become perfect soldiers. While they are not child soldiers in the sense of they don't fight battles as children, they are essentially brainwashed and indoctrinated into the army. So they are still technically child soldiers. So Krieg has a very, very dark past, even for Warhammer standards. Here we have another picture. So this is a double spread. The page on the right is the cover of the book itself. And to our left, we see some more chaos inferno. So we have some more soldiers running. We have a close-up of a soldier's helmet here, as well as something on fire, presumably a Krieger with a flamer lit this on fire. Now, the Krieg's design, as you may have seen, is based on World War One and a little bit of World War Two. They take inspiration from both the World War One German and French soldiers. Their uniform is very heavily inspired by World War One French uniforms, whereas their helmets are more to do with the World War II German helmet. I don't know if you can see it here, it's quite dark, but the helmets are essentially that of the soldiers of Germany in World War II. Really cool. I really like their aesthetic. That's mainly what made me decide to choose these guys. I actually wasn't even a fan of the Astra Militarum until I discovered the Krieg about 3 years ago, and after reading about them, looking at them, building an army, I fell in love with them. And yeah, so next up we have a little bit about some of the units of the Krieg. So here is our last little bit of information about the Krieg in general. And we also have treated to this great picture of a standard infantry corpsman. So this is him here with his helmet. You can see a little bit more of the World War II German helmet inspiration on this guy. And then this is his las rifle here with his bayonet. Like I said, World War One inspired, so they all have bayonets. And trust me, they know how to use them. So let's just read these last couple passages. So it says the Krieg soldiery. While the Death Corps largely adhere to similar force organization and chain of command as other Astra Militarum regiments, their armies do feature several unique units that have been created to fulfill important roles, particularly within the infamous siege regiment. I forgot to mention the Krieg are famous for their siege warfare. So these are the guys that whenever the Imperium needs a war of attrition or a siege, the Death Corps is the #1 choice. So it says one of the primary deviations from these guidelines is what the infantry sergeants are known by the title of Watchmaster, while sergeants of the cavalry Death Rider units are known as Rider Masters. So they do technically have sergeants, they're just called Watchmasters instead, and this is again exclusive to the Death Corps. All Death Corps soldiers, regardless of rank and with manning, trenches and artillery pieces or crewing vehicles, go to battle clad in rebreather hoods and environmentally sealed fatigues, covered with long flak weave greatcoats. Their uniforms are ordinary drab in colors, although subtle variations between regiments are common. The line infantry wield venerable Lucius pattern lasguns, a weapon with excellent stopping power, but a lower rate of fire than many of its equivalents. These lasguns possess bayonet lugs, and each Krieg warrior carries a bayonet as part of their standard issue equipment. The bayonet utilized by Krieg soldiers are long, sturdy weapons that can be wielded in one hand like a combat knife when not attached to the jug. I actually did not know that was called a jug of their lasgun. Most Krieg soldiers carry plenty of grenades for tossing into occupied trenches and disorientating foes before a charge. So yeah, that's quite cool, and I believe that's the last of our general Krieg information. One thing I will add, just because I forgot to mention it in the last section, is one of the things with the Krieg army is because they all see Colonel Jurten as their hero, none of the Krieg take a rank higher than Colonel. unless the Ministorum insists on it, in which they do it just to follow a command structure, but normally most Krieg will not willingly take any rank higher than Colonel. So next up, we have some of the different types of units and soldier types of the Death Corps of Krieg. Now, before we go on, just to help you guys visualize this, and I wasn't originally planning on doing this because I wanted to save it for the army video, but I wanted to show you some of the tabletop miniatures for the different ranks and positions of the Krieg soldiers, just so while I'm talking about them, you guys can kind of have a better picture in your head of what these guys actually look like. So here is, if we can focus, so this is your standard Death Corps of Krieg infantry. So he has his coat, his lasgun, and his gas mask. The Krieg do come in a lot of different colors based on their regiments. However, I mainly tend to paint mine either blue, gray, or green. Here is another version. This one is of the gray type, and he just has his gun over his shoulder. So these two are your standard infantry. That's what they kind of wield, and yeah. Next, we have another type of infantry. However, this one is a little bit more specialized. This is a combat engineer. So the combat engineers are a little bit different than your standard infantry. They specialize in demolitions and setting traps, which makes them extremely deadly, especially considering that this all takes place in trenches. And while your standard infantry corpsman has a las gun or a las rifle, your combat engineer has this revolver shotgun, which is one of my favorite weapons in Warhammer. It's such a cool idea for a weapon. Next, we have two of the same types of units. I just thought I would show them. So this is a Krieg Watchmaster. So this would normally be a sergeant, but in the Death Corps, this is a Watchmaster. So he has essentially the same standard gear as a normal infantry. However, as well as having a las gun, he also has a las pistol as well as a saber. Now, this can vary drastically. Sometimes they can have sabers, sometimes they can have chain swords, and yeah, so this is what a Watchmaster is normally equipped with. And then here is just another version of a Watchmaster in a slightly different color scheme, and whereas the other guy had a las pistol and a saber, this corpsman has a plasma pistol and a chainsword. Next, we have a little bit of a more specialized unit. So this is a Death Corps of Krieg specialized unit. So these guys are extremely skilled, a lot better trained, and have a lot more experience than your standard corpsman. And they usually each have a specific purpose. This guy is, I believe his official title is the Zealot. As you can see, he has some scripture in his hand, and his las rifle looks a little bit different, and that's not just because they painted it different, it is a slightly stronger variation of your typical las rifle. Now, next up, in terms of special forces, is this guy. Now, this is the elite of the elite of the Death Corps. This is your Death Corps of Krieg Grenadier. So the Grenadiers are the best of the best of the best. These are your special forces units of the Krieg. Whereas the standard corpsmen just have plain brown gas masks. These guys have a metal-plated skull mask on top of their gas mask. It is to symbolize that, one, they are already dead, 2 to show the enemy that death is coming for them, which is quite cool. They are equipped with something called a hell gun, which is essentially a las gun on steroids. So this thing is much more accurate and much more devastating, and you can see that it even needs like a actual power pack to connect to it. That's how powerful this is. Next we have our Commissar. So this is a Death Corps of Krieg Commissar. The Commissar is a role or a position that is occupied in every single branch of the Astra Militarum regardless. However, this is a Death Corps Commissar. Now, the Commissar essentially serves the same purpose. If you are familiar with the Commissars in the Soviet Union, that is basically what these guys are. They are political officers. They fall slightly outside the chain of command, however, they do take orders from their superiors. So very cool, but they are absolutely ruthless, and a normal commissar is not shy about executing his own men. However, most of the time, commissars that are assigned to the Krieg find themselves having to reel in their soldiers for their zeal rather than chastise them for the lack of it. Next, we have our Krieg command. Next up, we have our Krieg officer. So this is a guy who would be in a command squad with either a commissar general or a lord marshal. Really nice unit. They have this actual metal chest plate, which is really cool instead of your standard flak armor. They usually do carry some heavier firepower. However, this guy does not. It looks like that he is more of a communications officer, which is quite interesting. And you can see the red ribbon draped across his torso. And our last unit that I will show you guys is a unit that is unique to the Death Corps, and that is the Death Rider. So these are mounted cavalrymen with lances. They ride specially bred, genetically altered horses to sustain against radiation and make them all around much tougher. As you can see, even the horses have gas masks. That's how seriously they take it. Their lances are not just normal lances though. They are designed as anti-tank weapons. They have melter tips on them. The melter is a very powerful weapon in Warhammer. So these guys ride right at tanks to essentially blow them up, because if one of these things makes contact with a tank, that's the end of the tank. Now, most of the times the Death Riders die, because it's not often they get out of the explosion radius in time, but thus the name Death Riders. So yeah, I apologize for that. I just wanted to show you what each of the units actually look like before we start talking about them, so you can kind of have an idea of what each unit looks like while we discuss them. So let's get back to the book. Sorry, there actually is one more unit type. I did not think he would be mentioned, but turns out he actually is, so I thought I would show him to you. So this is a Death Corps of Krieg Quartermaster. These guys, instead of having the skull plate on top of their gas masks, like the Grenadiers, they just have skulls as their gas mask, which is so cool, as well as having a rib cage. Now, when I first started my Death Corps army, I thought the Quartermaster was your typical military quartermaster, you know, someone who's in charge of supplies and all that stuff, keeping track of who takes out what out of storage and all that. But no, that could not be further from the truth. The Krieg quartermaster is in charge of executing wounded soldiers, friendly soldiers. While the Krieg do have medics for stuff, you know, like setting broken bones and stuff like that, people who are deemed too wounded, either too wounded as in mortally wounded or too wounded as in not worth the effort of saving, the quartermaster goes around and executes them with a bullet to the head, showing them the Emperor's mercy, as they would put it. So, really interesting unit. Just goes to show how ruthless these guys are and how little they value their lives. Not just the officers putting no value on their subordinates' lives, but they all seem to have a complete disregard for their life. So with that out of the way, let's get back to the book. By the way, I forgot to mention this in the video. However, this is what all of the different Krieg uniform types look like. The uniforms are based on their regiments that they are currently in and the terrain that they are fighting in. So we have green, blue, gray, black, and a little bit of light brown. The top there is your standard infantry Krieg, while as the bottom there is your grenadiers. Again, the grenadiers are the kind of special forces of the Krieg, whereas the top row is just your average corpsman. So, yeah, I should have included this video in the video itself, so I apologize if this is a little jarring for me to just insert it into the video. But yeah, that's it. So let's get back to it. So our first type of unit that we are going to be talking about is the Death Corps officers. So Krieg officers of all ranks almost always lead from the front. This is not for any specific technical reason, but rather it is another example of the Death Corps' fanaticism and willingness to die for the Emperor. This often leads officers to select lethal sidearms and powerful weapons, which enable them to hold their own should they find themselves in the midst of a melee. Unlike other worlds, Krieg has no real aristocracy or class system. The officers of its regiments are promoted from the ranks or selected from their skills and bravery. This method of recruitment has the effect of ensuring that those who are elevated to command are able to lead and hardened. One thing it doesn't actually say here about the officers, but the Krieg do not have names. They just have their numbers, and that's how they identify themselves. And it's like a very long string of numbers, like, 5 to 6 digits. However, when a standard corpsman is promoted to either a lieutenant or a captain or something, they are forced to be given a name because of the Militarum needing to keep records. And they always take the names of those who are close to Colonel Yerton. So you usually have, in the entire army, all of the officers will have like the same 10 names, which is actually, it's sad, but it's also kind of funny that there could be like, 300 different captains all with the same name. And yeah, I really like this about the officers, that they aren't, your typical officers who lead from the back and tend to stay out of harm's way, whereas the Krieg officers are made officers based on the fact that one, they can hold their own, and they have already proven themselves in combat. And oftentimes, the Ministratum has to hold the officers back from going into combat because they want to try and keep them alive if they're skilled enough, whereas the officers just want to keep doing the same thing they've been doing their entire lives and, going over the top and charging into no man's land. Really, really cool, but also, very sad. Next page. Such is the Death Corps' way of that the officers show little concern for the casualties the regiment takes, treating attrition reports with no more importance than those detailed expended ammunition. This does not mean they waste their troops to no end. However, terrible casualties may be tolerated, but only if the possibility of victory exists. This cold and uncompromising style of command has been known to cause issues with when Death Corps officers are placed in charge of regiments from other worlds, and several mutinies have occurred. Death Corps officers rarely issue or display upon their uniforms medals, citations, or any other form of decoration, reasoning that bravery is expected from all and that the individuality of soldiers are merely cogs in the machinery of warfare. I cannot imagine being a standard soldier in a normal, quote-unquote normal, Astra Militarum squad, and then having a Death Corps captain coming in and taking over. That would be absolutely terrifying. I would be more scared of my captain than of the enemy. As in other regiments, it is common for company and platoon-level Death Corps officers to be accompanied to battle by a command squad formed of experienced veteran guardsmen and regimental advisors, bearing an array of banners, special weapons, and medical equipment. Many officers are drawn from the Death Rider formation, and thus share an affinity with the cavalry. It is not uncommon for Death Corps officers to go to war astride a Krieg steed. Very, very cool. So the command squads are made up of corpsmen who look very similar to the officer miniature that I showed you. Next up, we have the Commissars. So, the Commissars. The presence of Commissars in Astra Militarum armies has long been mandated by the Department Militarum. Also, by the way, I should just quickly say the Department Militarum, you've heard me say it a couple of times through this video. The Militarum are essentially the bureaucracy behind the Imperial Guard of the Astra Militarum. They are the ones that do all the paperwork. They are the ones that, dispatch units to certain areas. So they are the pencil pushers, for want of a better term, of the Astra Militarum. I probably should have mentioned that much earlier, but I just thought that I should say it now, just so you guys know what I'm talking about if I mention. And they are always present in Death Corps regiments. However, rather than enforcing obedience as they do in other regiments, the Commissars assigned to Krieg units are instead required to rein in the more fanatical officers and soldiers under their command. So loyal and zealous are the soldiers of Krieg that they often pursue short-term victories at the cost of men and material that may have proven vital in more important battles to come. It falls to the Commissar to ensure the strategic goals of the wider campaign are adhered to, and that such wasteful assaults are prevented. Still, such is the preference of Death Corps officers to fight at the front that casualty rates are higher amongst officers than in almost any other regiment. Thus, commissars serving in the Krieg regiments must be prepared to take command, as they are often forced to take the place of the fallen Death Corps officer at a moment's notice. So it is that in the heat of battle, many Death Corps formations will receive the orders from the senior commissar. So if you are familiar with Warhammer 40k, you know that commissars are hated, and I mean like truly hated, in basically every other regiment, because they are political officers. They will execute you for the slightest infringement. You know, if you refuse to like run into a landmine, they will just shoot you on the spot. So most of the time they are hated, but with the Krieg, instead of having to enforce zeal and the proper procedures, they often have to rein them in, which is so funny. There's a meme that I saw where it's like, you know, a commissar orders the other men under his command to retreat, and then when they get back to the trench, the Krieg infantry execute him for cowardice. I just think that's so funny and so in character. So, given the Death Corps' disdain for other, less motivated soldiers, the commissars are assigned to the Death Corps are often forced to act as liaisons between the Krieg officers and their counterparts in other regiments to prevent acrimony. As a result, commissars who have served alongside Krieg regiments are often more diplomatic and politically astute than others. So valued are postings with Krieg regiments that the Officio Prefectus has established a training facility upon Krieg itself. Here, Krieg's most promising officers, candidates, and relentlessly trained and drilled in the art of command and giving commissar training, and indoctrinated that tempers and hones their ingrained fanaticism and zeal. Known as prefectus militants, these officers accompany senior commissars to battle so that they may learn how to effectively channel their fanaticism for the benefit of the Imperium. Those who excel at this role may be progressed into the ranks of the Officio Prefectus as full commissars, or promoted within the Death Corps' own command structure, dependent on the need of the Krieg armies. So yeah, really just goes to show that, you know, apart from the constant looming death, that the Krieg are actually a pretty good regiment for a commissar to be posted in, because they don't really have to do much of anything. Really, really cool. So next up we have the Quartermasters. There's not that much on the Quartermasters. There's just this little side blurb here, but I thought I would include it anyway since I already showed the miniature. So, the Death Corps' long age replaced their battlefield medics with individuals known as Quartermasters. By the way, they do still have medics for stuff like broken bones, but for the most part, they just have Quartermasters. This role has its roots in the war-torn past of Krieg. In the civil wars that raged across its irradiated planet, the recovery of valuable military equipment was prioritized over the application of medical aid and triage. After all, a torn environment seal usually resulted in slow, lingering death. Thus, if a soldier could not be readily returned to action or retreat under their own power, they would be given the blessing of the Emperor's peace, an honorable field execution. It is the task, along with the recovery of the fallen soldiers' equipment, that still falls to the Quartermaster. So not only does the Quartermaster have to kill his own wounded men, but he has a retinue with him that then brings back and disperses the equipment of that soldier to other, most likely newer recruit units, which is horrifying to think of. That your, quote unquote new uniform was actually just a uniform that someone was wounded in, shot with, undressed, and then brought back to headquarters. These soldiers are provided with additional training in field medicine, tech lore, and battlefield triage, as well as deeper indoctrination into Krieg's sanctioned denomination of the imperial cult. Quartermasters, revenant, are responsible for the gathering of fallen soldiers' weapons and equipment. Quartermasters alchemic, by comparison, are experts in chemical and biological warfare, deploying with a wide range of stimulants, antiviral fluids, and salves with which to fortify important officers against the inimical conditions in which the Death Corps do battle. So yeah, the quartermasters have a whole retinue. So they have the guys who retrieve the equipment, they have medical servitors, and they have these guys known as alchemics, who are essentially bio-warfare specialists. Also, I do apologize if you guys have seen the corner of my iPad in the video, just because I'm reading the text off of that because I cannot for the life of me see the text in the book. So yeah, sorry if that pops up. I'm doing my best not to show it too much. So next up we have the rank and file. The vast majority of Krieg soldiers serve in the infantry formations. Those who survive this attritional form of warfare for any length of time may develop the skills and experience required to join one of the specialist units unique to the regiments of Krieg. Soldiers who demonstrate the requisite fearlessness and zeal may be chosen to become grenadiers. Those were the guys I showed you with the skull masks and the hell guns. Shock troops that operate on the front line and are responsible for storming enemy trenches and fortified positions. Grenadier units are often the first into the fray, tasked with seizing a foothold in enemy lines and holding it until further waves of infantry can reinforce them. To be selected for service as a grenadier is an honor that cannot be refused. So one thing just about the Krieg rank and file is they are extremely zealous in the imperial cult, and they abhor mutants and psychers. So whereas your standard Imperial Guard regiment may have a regimental psyker or some Ogryn or anything like that, the Krieg do not have any of these units. They just have their standard infantry. They don't have anything else like that because they view it as abomination. The lessons learned during Krieg's century-long civil war have led to them to develop bespoke units of soldiers dedicated to specific tasks in the grinding brutality of warfare in the 31st millennium. Taking even few meters of ground is often exceptionally difficult, whether advancing through drifting Tyranid spore mines, makeshift orc barricades, or towards the mobile turrets and barricades of the Tau invaders. There are always hazards and obstacles to clear. Thus, Death Corps' siege regiments almost always include specialized combat engineers. Again, those were the guys with the revolver shotguns, whose task is to clear the path for the infantry by cutting through wires, clearing minefields, and bringing down any obstacles likely to impede the progress of the assault. Some fortifications are so well defended that they are almost impossible to seize. impenetrable void shields, reinforced ferrocrete. Ferrocrete is essentially the Warhammer version of like super concrete. Bunkers, hovering tower turrets, and barricades. All are capable of all are capable of dooming direct assault. Okay, so moving on to the next page. So here is a really cool picture of some Krieg. What looked to be they are in a trench or in some underground dugout. We have, what do we have here? So we have 3 infantry units here. We have this guy who seems to be dragging a fallen comrade back. This corpsman here with his gas mask, and you can see their number on their side, on their shoulder. This man here, I'm assuming, is the Watchmaster, and then this is just some of the bunker around them. Really cool. And we also here, let me just zoom in, have an awesome picture of a Quartermaster with a servo skull. So yeah, great art. Great art. This book, as a Deathcore of Krieg diehard fan, this book is like beyond incredible to me. I absolutely love this, and I'm so glad that I get to share this with you guys. So let's continue about the rank and file of the Death Corps. To breach these positions, the armies of Krieg may call upon the Engineer Corps. Krieg combat engineers are equipped with varied tunneling equipment and make use of a range of tools, including a geothermal auspex. An auspex is kind of like a map in Warhammer, like a digital map. Shovels, melter charges, and remote mines to swiftly destroy static and mobile defenses, opening a route for the Allies to advance. This form of combat is fraught with danger, with artillery fire raining down above. Tunnel collapse is all too common, as is the premature detonation of explosives and the munition stores. Many enemies are prepared for such strategies, often leading to bloody firefights in cramped and hellish conditions. Combat engineers carry shotguns, trench clubs, auto pistols, and other close-range weaponry. These guys, like I said, operate almost exclusively in enemy trenches or underground dugouts. Where was I? That can be wielded in tight conditions such as tunnels, trenches, and cramped bowels of voidcraft or the labyrinth depths of a besieged hive city. Led by experienced soldiers known as Watchmasters, combat engineer squads also wear heavier ablative flak armor designed to absorb concussive force and deflect shrapnel. Makes sense if you're dealing with explosives. And bladed weaponry, thereby offering greater protection against explosions and the intense and brutal fighting of trench warfare. As much as the equipment is really cool, I would not like to be a combat engineer. I'd much prefer just to be an infantryman. Combat engineers make use of a variety of remotely operated vehicles. The most common of these various patterns are remote mines operated by the squad's Watchmaster. These servitor devices are little more than mobile explosives mounted atop tracks resembling drills. Combat engineer squads will often utilize these devices to bypass or destroy barbed wire, dragon teeth, and other battlefield obstacles, or destroy enemy war machines or xeno monstrosities without exposing themselves to potentially lethal enemy fire. When used on the defensive, these mobile mines can be used as booby traps to decimate incoming infantry. Or used as improvised anti-tank weapons and guided towards enemies' armor before being remotely detonated. The casualty rates in Grenadier and Combat Engineer squads are so great that it has become a tradition for these members to wear a skull mask. These masks signify the warriors' acceptance of their fate that awaits all of the Krieg soldiers. Wow, that's really, really dark, but that's just the life of the Krieg. But yeah, they have these, my favorite of their little gadgets is they have these little, almost like remote control cars. If you've played like the Black Ops Call of Duty games, or at least some of the earlier ones, if you can imagine like an RCXD, but instead of like a little tiny bit of explosive attached to it, it has an anti-tank mine on top of it, and they just drive it underneath an enemy tank and blow it up from underneath. Really cool and also really, really funny. Next up, and last but certainly not least, is the Death Riders. Of all the unique formations fielded by the armies of Krieg, the Death Riders may be the most infamous. At first glance, these cavalry units appear similar to the Rough Rider cavalry formed in many different Astra Militarum regiments. The Death Riders are, in fact, a direct product of Krieg's centuries-long civil war. These legendary Krieg steeds, I lost my place, ridden by Death Riders are bioengineered monstrosities. Centuries of extreme gene editing, surgical alterations, and synthetic organ implantation have created towering destriers possessed of boundless stamina, brutal strength, and unnatural aggression, just as the troopers who ride them. These steeds are viewed as disposable instruments of war. They are created in production line fashion, with a unique number assigned to each steed, just as Death Corps soldiers are outfitted for battle in a variety of hazardous environments. So are the steeds, fitted with rebreather hoods, osmotic lungs, and subdermal organic armor. In place of hooves, they possess clawed and gnarled feet that provide exceptional grip when charging over muddy, rocky, or uneven ground. These muscular animals can plow through razor wire, leap over trenches, and charge over boggy ground without so much as slowing. The powerful psychological effect of such a charge is often enough to send the foe scurrying for safety. Death Riders are chosen for displaying initiative and independent thought, two attributes rare among the soldiers of the Krieg. Death Riders can perform many duties but are most often utilized as scouts for the siege regiments, or as shock troops to press home an attack. They are often equipped with impact lances, the explosive tips of which explode on contact, rendering them capable of killing or wounding several foes with a single thrust. Each rider carries a power saber and a las carbine, enabling them to engage at range when scouting at the enemy positions or charging into combat if required to break through the enemy lines. So the Death Riders are absolute, for want of a better term, mad lads. They can take on infantry, they can take on vehicles. The lances are melter tipped with grenades attached to it, so they're able to destroy tanks. And then, in case anyone gets too close, they also have a firearm and a saber. So that's insane. And just, I think the Death Riders really show just how extreme the Krieg can be, in my opinion. They're one of my favorite units in the entire army. Anyway, let us continue. Okay, so let's start off with our first world and regiment, Cadia. So the soldiers of Cadia are inheritors of martial legacy that stretches back almost 10,000 years. The home planet may have been shattered, but the fighting spirit of the Cadian regiments did not die with it, while their lineage continues and their banners fly high on the battlefield. The survivors proclaim that Cadia still stands. So if you remember, I said that Cadia got destroyed, so Cadians are very proud of their heritage, especially now. Cadians also have probably the overall best quality soldiers out of all of the Astra Militarum, and that's high praise coming from someone who doesn't like the Cadians. I know I'm probably going to get flamed in the comments for that. But yeah, the Cadians are serious business. They also have the best special forces in Warhammer. They are called Karsken. They have essentially a very subdued form of power armor, extreme training, and I believe slight genetic enhancements. I might be wrong about that part, but they are really good. Whereas the Grenadiers are just essentially suicidal madmen. These guys actually have the, equipment and stuff to back it up rather than just a skull faceplate. And you guys don't know how much it hurt me to say that. Next up, Catachan. So they are the jungle fighters. Catachan is one of the most notorious and deadly death worlds in the entire Imperium. Yet, within its dense jungles are lethal ecosystems to many human settlements. Raised amidst their homeworld's savage flora and fauna, the Catachan people are fearless, intelligent, and hardy, making them the perfect warriors to fight the Imperium's ceaseless wars. So the Catachan warriors are some of the toughest soldiers in the Astra Militarum. Their homeworld is nigh on near inhabitable based on how hostile the environment is. Both the climate, the fauna, the flora, basically everything there is a apex predator. So these guys are not just trained to be soldiers, but they are so used to survival of the fittest that they are absolutely deadly when it comes to combat. The meme in the community is that they are an army of Rambos, because a lot of the design was based on Rambo from the movie Rambo, which actually makes a lot of sense, because if you look up fan art or just any art of Catachan soldiers, that's what they look like. Really cool units. Not my personal cup of tea, but I do really like them as a design. Next up, we have the Valhallans, the Ice Warriors. So the regiment of Valhalla have established a well-earned reputation for stoicism and a devotion to the imperial creed. When on the offensive, they combine massed artillery with overwhelming infantry assaults. When defending their ground against their foe, they display a stubborn determination to hold their positions even when defeat seems certainty. So Valhallans come from an ice world, which is essentially a frigid hellscape. So they are used to extreme cold temperatures, which makes them extremely resilient, which makes them which makes them have extreme endurance in battle. Really cool. A lot of them are based on the designs of the World War II Soviets. A lot of these armies, actually all of these armies, are all kind of based around a real world army, or real world military force. So the Krieg are based on World War One soldiers. The Cadians are kind of based on more of a modern military if it was in the future. The Catachans are more based on, you know, American soldiers in Vietnam. And the Valhallans are based on the, what's it called? The Soviet era with the, you know, frigid greatcoats and all that from their hostile homeworld. So, moving on. So here you can see some of the Valhallan homeworld. You know, as you can see, it's just all snow and ice and glaciers. The soldiers are wrapped up tight and everything, so quite cool. Next up, we have the Mordians. So they are known as the Iron God. The Mordian Iron God hail from the world that is half bathed in a perpetual darkness, and has been invaded many times by the armies of chaos. The Mordian soldiers are skilled and disciplined warriors who march to war in flawless formation. Their polished boots, spoils uniforms, and apparent arrogance belying their effectiveness in grinding battle. So the Mordians are, like it says, they look very pompous, but they are not to be taken lightly. They are extremely skilled warriors. They look, in my opinion, kind of like a mixture of mid-19th century, you know, English soldiers or French soldiers, with, you know, their bright colored uniforms, and they all have, you know, sabers at their side. Really cool unit. They are probably my second favorite in terms of aesthetic, with the Krieg being number one, of course. And yeah, so next up we have the Talon, which are known as the Desert Raiders. The Talon Desert Raiders are guerrilla fighters who favor hit and fade attacks, really bringing their full strength to bear at once, and instead preferring to pick apart the unwieldy formations of the foe. They are a patient people, slow to anger, but utterly determined and pitiless when pursuing the enemies of mankind. These guys sound really cool. However, I actually do not know much, if anything, about them, so I don't have much to say on their appearance or anything. I probably should have looked into it before I started making the video, but yeah, they sound really cool. I like the idea of a desert faction, because we've seen basically factions from every different type of climate, you know, from ice worlds to jungles to, you know, irradiated hellscapes. So it's cool that we get a desert faction. And our final faction is Armageddon, and you can see down here some of the landscape of the homeworld. So Armageddon, the Steel Legion. Few Imperial planets have seen conflict on the same scale of frequency as Armageddon. Demons, Chaos Space Marines, Orcs, and all these foes and more have assailed this key industrial world. In these conflicts and others across the galaxy, have the mechanized regiments of the Armageddon Steel Legion served with distinction. Really cool. So yeah, these guys are on essentially like a factory world, or a forge world, I believe it's called. Quite cool. I really like the picture that we see here, and it just goes to show that if this is their environment, you know, what kind of soldiers would this environment bring, which is terrifying. Now, these are not all of the different regiments and stuff in the Astra Militarum. These are just a few. There are many, many, many more. And what is really cool about the Astra Militarum as a faction is that you can make an army of whichever ones you personally prefer. So if you say really like the Morians, you can make an entire army of Morians. If you love the Cadians, which so many people do, you can make an army of the Cadians. If you're like me and you are a diehard Krieg fan, you can make an army out of Krieg. And it's essentially whichever you find coolest, you can make, which is one of the reasons I love Warhammer, because it doesn't matter about the rules, doesn't matter about metas or anything. If you think they're cool, that's the army for you. And next section we have is war gear. However, guys, that is going to be it for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I was super excited to finally record this video. I had been wanting to make a Codex video for a while, and I had been getting a lot of requests for it, so I'm so glad that I finally got to start it. And I will be recording part 2 as soon as I am finished wrapping up this outro. So please do let me know, and please be honest, what do you think of the Warhammer Codex videos? So, because this, while there is art, there's not that much art. It's mainly to do with lore. So I have codexes for all my armies except for one. So if you guys like this kind of content, I'm more than happy to cover each and every single one of them. We can do Sororitas, we can do Mechanicus, we can do Blood Angels, we can do Custodes, we can do Grey Knights, we can do everything. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Again, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. My name has been Crimson, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Have a good evening.